Welcome. Thank you for arriving here in this quiet stretch of time. The day has already carried you through its many currents, its pulls and demands, its countless fragments of thought. But now you are here at the edge of stillness, and that alone is enough. You have chosen for a little while to pause, to listen, and to let the sky open above you. If you'd like to join us again for these quiet journeys through science and wonder, consider subscribing. No pressure at all, only if it feels right to you. Let yourself settle. The world can wait. The noise of its unfinished conversations and its unfinished tasks will remain waiting when you return. For now, you are not required to solve anything or to chase anything. You can simply let the air move in and out of you, like the long breath of the ocean, and know that you are safe within this moment. Allow your thoughts to soften around the edges, as though they were stones in a stream, smoothed by water, worn to gentleness. Above us, always, there is the sky. It does not hurry, it does not push. It simply turns, and in its turning it writes its own patient story. The stars are the words of that story, a library spread across darkness. Some of those words have been there since before we were born, and they will remain long after we are gone. Yet, every so often, a new word appears in that library, drifting quietly across the page. Something unfamiliar enters, small at first, almost unnoticed, yet carrying with it a kind of weight, a whisper, a suggestion that the universe still has more to say. One by one, we have learned to notice these arrivals. The first came in 2017, a thin shard of something from outside our solar home. We called it Oumuamua, the scout, the messenger. It slipped past us so quickly that by the time we realized it was here, it was already gone, leaving questions in its wake. Was it a rock? Was it ice? Was it something stranger still? We asked, and we still ask, but the answers remain elusive. Not long after, another traveler appeared. We named it Borisov, after the one who found it. This time, it looked more familiar, more like a comet we already knew, shedding its trail of dust and gas as it hurried across our sky. But even then, the simple fact of its presence mattered. For billions of years, as far as we can tell, nothing had crossed into our solar system from the vast interstellar gulf. And then, in only a few brief years, we witnessed two such wanderers. Now, there is a third. Its name is 3I Atlas, the third interstellar visitor we have recorded. And it arrives quietly, like a shadow among brighter lights. Not as bold as the scout, not as brilliant as Borisov, more fragile, more faint, almost overlooked. Yet sometimes, it is the faintest arrivals that ask the loudest questions. Imagine the sky as a great hall of echoes. Across its distances, signals, objects, and patterns drift like voices in a cathedral. Some echoes are strong, clear, like the voice of a bell. Others are so soft they almost vanish, like a footstep at the far end of the chamber. 3I Atlas is one of those quiet echoes. It came into view, only briefly, and already its light has dimmed. Many will not remember it at all, but in the hush it leaves behind, some wonder if there is more to hear. You might already feel the quiet pull of this mystery. Perhaps you have sensed it before. That subtle weight when something small hints at something vast. A shape in the dark, a flicker that feels deliberate, a silence that seems too measured to be empty. 3I Atlas does not arrive with the drama of a comet tearing its way across the night. Instead, it hovers near absence, as though its meaning lies in what it almost is, or in what it almost reveals. And so we begin here with a question. What might it mean when the universe sends us visitors like this? Are they only fragments, broken stones drifting without purpose? Or are they part of a larger pattern, one we have not yet learned to read? Maybe they are coincidences, nothing more. Maybe they are messages, though not in any language we yet understand. Maybe they are reminders, gentle, distant reminders that we are not alone in the deep waters of the cosmos. In this story, we will move slowly. We will listen not only to what is present, but to what is missing. We will wander through signals that appear once and never again. We will look at the geometry of orbits, at the patterns objects trace across the solar system like lines drawn by an unseen hand. And we will ask softly whether 3i Atlas is only a fragile piece of ice, or something that carries, in its silence, a hidden message that no one is yet talking about. For now, allow yourself to rest inside this question. Imagine the sky above you, vast and quiet, its stars watching with unhurried patience. Imagine 3 visitors, 3 arrivals from beyond, slipping into that sky one after another. The scout, the comet, the fragile shadow. And now imagine that perhaps, just perhaps, the third is not the end of the pattern, but the beginning of it. We do not know. We may never know. But still, the thought drifts. Perhaps in silence, there is something waiting to be heard. And with that, we move closer, toward the story of this third visitor, and toward the echoes it awakens from an older mystery, one that shouted only once, long ago, then fell forever silent. It was given a name, though names in astronomy are always both precise and impersonal. Numbers, slashes, and acronyms strung together like coded fragments, each one carrying its own small logic. 3i Atlas. The 3i comes first, and already the weight of those 2 characters tells a story. The I stands for interstellar, the rarest category of all. The number 3 marks its place in sequence, the third time humanity has seen such a thing with certainty. Oumuamua was the first, Borisov the second, and now here a third. The Atlas is the telescope array that first noticed its faint glimmer, a quiet flag planted on discovery. Altogether, 3i Atlas is both an identifier and a reminder. It reminds us that this visitor did not belong to us until we gave it a name, and even now it belongs to no one at all. It slipped into notice in the spring of 2020, a year when much of our world turned inward, when silence spread across cities, and yet above us the sky went on with its endless rhythms. The Atlas Survey, an automated watchtower scanning for asteroids, found a moving point of light, one so dim and fragile that it might have been overlooked. Many discoveries begin this way, with faint points among millions, data filtered through patience and repetition. But this one, once its orbit was traced, revealed its true strangeness. It did not come from the frozen belt at the edge of our system. It did not follow the looping paths of comets we have charted for centuries. Its track was hyperbolic, open, unbound. Its origin lay in the deep between stars, far beyond our sun's reach. In this way, 3i Atlas was confirmed as interstellar. Not ours, not native, a traveler through the dark sea, a guest stepping briefly through the doorway of our solar system, then continuing on its way. And unlike many comets, its light behaved strangely. It brightened at first, as comets often do when warming near the sun. But then, instead of blazing more strongly, its glow faded, as if something within it was breaking down. Astronomers suggested it might be crumbling, fragmenting into smaller pieces. A fragile body, unable to hold together. This fragility makes it different from the others. Oumuamua, though baffling in its shape and its motion, remained intact as it fled our system. Borisov, though foreign, looked almost like any other comet, shedding its gases in a familiar way. But Atlas seemed weaker, as though the long journey across interstellar space had hollowed it. or as though it was never built to last in the first place. To many, this is only evidence of nature's accidents, an icy shard, broken by its own chemistry. To others, the faintness and the decline invite wonder. Why here? Why now? Why this? Imagine it not only as a comet, but as a guest, a traveler who has stepped softly into our home, pausing at the threshold. Its presence is brief, its steps are almost silent, but silence can draw attention too. A quiet guest can sometimes be noticed more than the loud ones. 3i Atlas moved this way, slipping through the solar doorway without spectacle, its voice fading before most people ever realized it was there. And yet, even in fading, it leaves questions. Why 3 visitors in such a short span, after so many lifetimes of none? Why this one? So faint, so fragile, almost like a whisper rather than a word. Patterns are what our minds seek, even when nature insists there are none. Perhaps this is only the human urge to find meaning in chance, but perhaps the pattern is real. The very letters of its name can be read like layers of meaning. 3 Interstellar, Atlas, the titan who held the sky. A fragment of myth carried into a designation meant to be dry and scientific. We did not choose it for poetry, but still, the poetry arrives. This is how the cosmos often speaks. Indirectly, through the ways we notice, through the names we assign, through the resonances we cannot help but hear. And if we look closer, even the data itself begins to whisper. Brightness curves that rise, then unexpectedly fall, orbital lines that mark improbable paths, records of fragments that suggest something unraveling just beyond the reach of certainty. To most, these are nothing but complications, the ordinary noise of imperfect observation. But now and then, noise conceals signal. In 1977, a burst of radio static was dismissed by some as noise, until one astronomer circled it in red and wrote a single word: wow. That signal never returned, never repeated, and yet its mystery persists because it asked a question without answering it. In the same way, 3i Atlas holds its silence, hiding its intentions in data that seem too quiet, too faint to speak clearly. Maybe it is only ice, only dust, only coincidence. Maybe its fading is simply what fragile things do. But maybe. And this maybe is the echo that lingers. Maybe the fading itself is a kind of message, an anomaly meant to draw us closer. A puzzle hidden in decline. It is easy to look at a fragment and see only what it lacks. It is harder to look at that same fragment and imagine what it might mean. 3i Atlas is a fragment, a sliver passing through our skies. But fragments, too, can carry whole stories, if only we know how to listen. And so, as it slips farther away, it leaves us with the feeling that something unspoken remains, a question half-formed, waiting in the shadows of its vanishing light. We do not yet know how to read it. We do not know if there is anything there at all. But as with the wow signal, absence does not erase mystery. It only deepens it. And so we keep watch. We wait. And we wonder what else might be hidden in the faint data of visitors like these. Already, the path of our story curves toward silence, toward the moment when this third messenger will move behind the sun, hidden from us entirely, its faint glow lost in the blaze. And in that hidden interval, what might be concealed? What might emerge? There is a moment, quiet but inevitable, when even the most careful watchers must let go of their sight. Objects that drift across our sky, whether near or far, can only be followed so long as light reveals them. And yet, there comes a time when that light is swallowed by something greater. The sun, our own star, so radiant and commanding, can erase almost anything from our vision. When an object moves behind its brilliance, no telescope on Earth can follow. It is as though the guest has stepped into a chamber of fire, and for a while, it simply ceases to exist. Astronomers call this moment solar occultation. The word is careful, technical, almost cold in tone, but what it describes is something deeply poetic. An occultation is a concealment. A body disappears from view, not because it has gone, but because something brighter overwhelms it. We can calculate the hidden path. We can draw the line of its motion, confident it is still there. But calculation is not sight. And for those hours or days when the sun stands in the way, the object is truly lost to us. Imagine a flame held too close to the eyes. Anything behind it blurs and vanishes, erased by glare. The sun is a flame beyond all flames. Its brilliance tens of thousands of times brighter than the scattered light of a comet or the faint gleam of an interstellar shard. Against such power, even the most advanced instruments falter. The universe hides itself in brightness as much as in shadow. For Three-Eye Atlas, this passage behind the sun is more than a technical note in its orbit. It is an interval of mystery. The fragile traveler already flickers faintly, already threatens to vanish through its own crumbling. To lose it, even briefly, feels like a silence layered upon silence. We can predict its reemergence, but we cannot guarantee how it will appear. Perhaps dimmer, perhaps broken, perhaps gone. The sun's blaze becomes not only a curtain, but a question mark. This is not the first time such vanishings have occurred. Throughout history, comets have been lost to the sun's glare, only to return transformed. Some have emerged with tails newly ignited, brilliant in the sky, like heralds carrying fresh fire. Others have failed to return at all, destroyed in the furnace, their paths ending in a final dissolution. One of the most dramatic examples was Comet Ison in 2013, a body that promised to shine as one of the great comets of the century. It grew bright as it approached the sun, slipped into the fire, and then nothing. It disintegrated almost entirely, its fragments scattering into invisibility. The watchers were left with emptiness where expectation had been. Even more famous are the sun grazers, comets that skim so close to the sun they seem to dare destruction. Some survive, some perish. But all of them remind us that this occultation is not only concealment, but transformation. What goes behind the sun may not return in the same form. What disappears behind the blaze carries with it the possibility of change. To speak of an object vanishing behind the sun is also to speak of metaphor. A message hidden in a flame, a word written on paper, then held too close to a candle, the letters glowing before they burn away. Or perhaps it is like a secret passed in whispers, lost in the crackle of a fire, yet still present for anyone who listens closely enough. The sun's glare is not silence, but it mimics silence. It covers what is there, folding it in light so intense that the absence feels absolute. And in that absence, the mind begins to imagine. If there were something unusual about Three-Eye Atlas, something we have not yet seen, what better hiding place than this? What better stage than the curtain of our own star, where the most careful instruments are forced to turn their gaze aside? We can think of this moment as an intermission in the play of the cosmos. The traveler walks off stage, the lights dim, and for a while, we are left in anticipation. When the curtain lifts again, we may find the same character or a changed one, or perhaps none at all. The ancients, who watched the skies without telescopes or sensors, understood something of this mystery too. They saw the disappearance of planets into solar conjunction, the long weeks when Venus or Mercury could not be seen, swallowed in brightness. To them, the vanishings were both expected and symbolic, moments of withdrawal that carried the weight of myth. What was hidden in the sun might return renewed, or it might be taken entirely. In their stories, these intervals were liminal, thresholds where transformation occurred, where one thing became another, unseen. For modern astronomers, the loss is more precise, but no less profound. We record coordinates, predict orbits, trust the numbers to carry us through the blindness. And yet, there is always an unease, because prediction is not presence. Numbers tell us where the traveler should be, but they cannot guarantee its survival. Behind the sun, anything could happen, and we would not know until the blaze has passed. So when 3i Atlas slipped into that hidden corridor, what exactly was concealed? Only ice and dust dissolving further? Or something else? Something that data alone cannot reveal? Perhaps it was nothing more than natural fragility. But perhaps the silence of the sun was also a shelter, a place where anomalies could hide in plain sight, beyond the reach of our gaze. The thought lingers, because we have seen this pattern before. A signal heard once and never again. An object seen faintly, then gone. Gaps in our records. Gaps in our perception. Gaps where meaning seems to pool like water in a hollow. Perhaps what vanishes is not always lost. Perhaps sometimes it is hidden deliberately. A message tucked behind the blaze, waiting for the right eyes, the right moment, the right patience to draw it out. And so we wait, just as we waited for Ison, for Borisov, for each comet that disappeared into the furnace. We wait for 3i Atlas to step out from behind the fire, either as itself or as fragments, or as nothing at all. Waiting is part of the rhythm of astronomy. Waiting is part of the rhythm of wonder. Because what lies in concealment is not emptiness, it is possibility. And possibility is the heart of mystery. In that silence, in that brightness, something may be hidden. Something faint, something almost overlooked. And perhaps, just perhaps, that something is not only ice and dust, but a message carried across light years, folded carefully into a fragile body, revealed not in its presence, but in its vanishing. And so we follow the line of its path in thought, even when we cannot follow it with our eyes. We imagine it moving behind the sun, beyond reach, carrying with it whatever secrets it holds. When it emerges again, what will remain? What will be lost? What will be revealed? These are the questions that gather in the blaze, and they are questions we carry with us now. As we turn toward the next thread of our story, the calm before speculation, and the way anomalies first whisper, almost unnoticed. From the edges of what we can see, it is always best to begin with humility. The universe is vast, and our vision of it, even with the most advanced instruments, is partial, fragile, and fleeting. When we speak of interstellar visitors, our first duty is to admit what they most often are: ice, dust, and silence. Comets are fragile things, shaped by the long exile of space, their bodies porous, brittle, always on the edge of disintegration. When one appears, streaking across our field of vision, the simplest explanation is usually the right one. A frozen shard, set adrift from some distant star system, wandered across interstellar dark until gravity pulled it through our neighborhood. A fragment of elsewhere, nothing more. This is what science teaches us to hold close: the discipline of restraint. To look, to measure, to calculate, and to remind ourselves that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. That most anomalies dissolve into patterns once more data is gathered. That excitement must be tempered by patience, and mystery must be balanced against method. The skeptical voice is not an enemy of wonder. It is its guardian. Without doubt, wonder loses shape and collapses into fantasy. So when astronomers speak of 3i Atlas, they remind themselves, and us, that fragile ice can explain its sudden fading, that comets often break apart, shedding brightness as they crumble into dust, that its unusual dimming need not be unusual at all, only the familiar end of a fragile body, dissolving under the weight of solar heat and the stretch of tidal forces. We must respect this explanation because it is grounded, careful, earned through centuries of sky watching. It may indeed be the whole truth. And yet, there is always a pause, a small silence in which the mind turns over the facts again. Because anomalies rarely announce themselves with grandeur. The strange does not often arrive with trumpets or spectacle. More often, it whispers from the edges, a deviation in a curve, a brightness that falls too quickly, a silence where sound was expected, or a sound where silence should be. At first glance, these are trivial. They are explained away, folded neatly into the margins of error. But sometimes, it is in those margins that history shifts. It could be only ice. It could be only dust. It could be only silence, or it could be more. That phrase echoes, not as a denial of science, but as an acknowledgement of its deepest strength. Science thrives not only on certainty, but on uncertainty. The willingness to admit, we do not yet know. That space between explanation and mystery is not a flaw, but a frontier. It is what keeps us watching, measuring, wondering. Consider Oumuamua, the first interstellar object we ever detected. For most astronomers, the explanation remains simple. A shard of rock or ice ejected from another system, passing through ours by chance. And yet, its acceleration, its peculiar shape, its silence, these remain subjects of debate, lingering like faint aftertastes long after the main conclusion has been written down. Was it only natural? Almost certainly. But still, the questions remain. Or think of Comet Borisov, the second visitor, more typical, more easily explained. A comet, plain and clear. And yet, even in its ordinariness, it confirmed something extraordinary. That interstellar travelers are not impossibilities, not one-time wonders, but part of a larger, unseen stream. Our solar system is not sealed. It is porous. Guests pass through, carrying the signatures of faraway places. And then they leave again, fading back into the dark. And now, the third. Three-Eye Atlas, fragile, dimming, almost overlooked. A traveler that seems at first to fit the mold, and yet not quite. Its brightness fell faster than expected. Its body seemed frailer than most. Observers shook their heads gently, noting its fragility, noting its loss, noting how little could be studied before it slipped away. Almost nothing, they said. Almost gone. And yet, it could be only ice. It could be only dust. It could be only silence. Or it could be more. This is the rhythm of discovery. This is the rhythm of science itself. Cautious steps, balanced by imagination. We learn not by clinging only to certainty, but by opening the door, just slightly, to the possibility that what we are seeing is not entirely what we think. Most of the time, the door closes again, and the mystery resolves into the familiar. But sometimes, very rarely, the door stays open. And when it does, the entire landscape of our understanding shifts. Skepticism tells us Three-Eye Atlas is fragile, fading, natural. Speculation whispers. Perhaps there is something in the way it fades, something in the timing of its loss, something in the silence between what we saw and what we expected. Most of the time, whispers remain whispers, but every great discovery began with one. Faint, uncertain, easy to overlook. The calm before speculation is not denial, but balance. It is the pause that keeps us grounded, even as we allow ourselves to wonder. To imagine that among the billions of ordinary comets, A handful might carry something different. Not proof, not even probability, but possibility. It could be only ice. It could be only dust. It could be only silence, or it could be more. And if it is more, we must ask ourselves, what would more look like? A message hidden in the curve of a brightness fading too soon? A pattern folded into the dust, waiting to be seen only by those who care to measure carefully enough? Perhaps, or perhaps the more is not in the object itself, but in what it teaches us, to notice, to listen, to remain humble before the unknown. For anomalies do not always stay anomalies. Sometimes they dissolve, sometimes they ignite, sometimes they echo through decades, like voices we hear only once and spend lifetimes trying to understand. Which brings us to a different kind of anomaly. One not of ice and dust, but of sound. A signal heard once, sharp and unmistakable. Then never again. A signal that shouted where others whispered, and then vanished into silence. To hear more, we must remember an older mystery. One that shouted once, then never again. Now we move deeper into the silence, into a moment that seemed to pause the steady clockwork of discovery. For most nights, astronomy is a patient science. Long hours, slow data, the hum of machines listening to signals that arrive faint and steady. But sometimes, very rarely, there is a spike, a sudden rise above the noise, and when it happens, it feels as if the universe itself has spoken. It was August of 1977, in the long summer heat of Ohio. At the edge of a quiet campus, the Big Ear radio telescope kept its endless vigil, scanning the skies with ears wider than any human's, listening for signals that did not belong to Earth. It was not a new search. By then, the dream of hearing something from the stars had already captured imaginations, but it was still only that, a dream, speculative, more hope than data. And then, on one ordinary evening, the telescope's printer spat out a line of numbers and letters, rows of data that looked no different from thousands before it. Most of the time, the page was filled with background static, random numbers, faint whispers of noise. But on this sheet, in one narrow section, a cluster of characters rose high above the rest. 6EQUJ5, a string that, to an astronomer trained in the language of signal strength, meant something extraordinary. When Jerry Amon, a volunteer researcher, sat down to review the output, he saw it instantly. Not as just numbers, but as an event. He circled the cluster in red ink, unable to contain the jolt of recognition. And in the margin, he wrote a single word. Wow! That exclamation, unpolished and spontaneous, became the name of the signal itself. Not an acronym, not a technical code, but the human gasp of wonder at something that should not have been there. The signal lasted for 72 seconds, the length of time the telescope could hold its ear to one patch of sky as the Earth rotated. 72 seconds, no more, no less. In that brief span, the signal rose and fell like a voice caught by accident, strong, unmistakable, and then gone. The source seemed to lie in the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, near the heart of our galaxy. It did not match a satellite. It did not match known natural sources. It was narrow-band, focused, carrying the fingerprints of something deliberate, as if tuned. And then, silence. No telescope since has ever heard it again. Despite decades of follow-up, despite rescanning the same region again and again, the sky has withheld its repetition. Like a door opening for an instant, showing light from the other side, then slamming shut. For astronomers, the wow signal was both exhilarating and frustrating. It was, by all measurable standards, exactly the kind of event they had hoped to find. strong, clean, sharp against the background. It was not noise. It was not random interference. And yet, without a repeat, science could not proceed. One data point is not a conclusion. One voice in the dark could be anything, a passing anomaly, an echo of something we misread, or perhaps the brush of another intelligence. The haunting lies not in certainty, but in ambiguity. If the signal had never appeared, we might still dream, but with less urgency. If it had repeated, we might already have built an entire field of study around it. But it did not repeat. It stood alone, singular, like a stone tossed once into a pond, leaving ripples that have never quite faded. You can imagine the feeling of those who studied it closely, to stare at that curve, to trace its rise and fall, knowing it is real, but not knowing what it means. Perhaps you, drifting now, can sense the weight of such a silence. A message that seemed clear, then dissolved into absence. A question asked, but never answered. The wow. Signal has lived on, not as evidence, but as a ghost. It remains one of the strongest candidates for an extraterrestrial transmission ever recorded. Yet it sits in the uneasy category of unresolved. It was not dismissed. It was not confirmed. It was left hanging, suspended. A reminder of how little we control the rhythm of discovery. We may listen for centuries and never hear it again. Or we may hear it tomorrow, in another form, from another corner of the sky. Scientists proposed explanations. Maybe it was a reflection of Earth signals off space debris. Maybe it was a natural hydrogen emission, unusually focused. Maybe it was a comet, radiating radio noise at just the right frequency, at just the right moment. Each explanation calms the anomaly, but none fit perfectly. Each leaves a residue of doubt, an outline of something unresolved. And so, the wow. Signal exists now less as data, and more as story. A parable about the limits of listening, about how vast the sky is, how brief our opportunities, how fragile our instruments, and how enormous the patience required to detect something not of ourselves. Maybe it was only a comet. Maybe it was only noise. Maybe it was never more than a coincidence of numbers, a chance convergence. But maybe, it was the first time the universe leaned close enough for us to hear it breathe. The image of Jerry Eamon's red circle endures. That handwritten exclamation, "Wow!" embodies something rare in science. The trace of astonishment that escapes calculation. It was the moment when an ordinary night became extraordinary, when silence broke, when wonder outweighed skepticism, if only for a second. And though the data has not returned, the resonance has. Every time a new anomaly appears, every time an interstellar visitor fades too quickly or brightens too strangely, the memory of 1977 stirs again. The same question rises. Was that it? Did we miss the one moment we have been waiting for? The wow signal did not give us an answer, but it gave us a shape, a template of what the extraordinary might look like when it arrives. Strong, narrow, brief, unrepeatable. A door opening, then closing. And as we think of interstellar objects like 3I Atlas fading behind the sun, lost to our instruments for a season, we cannot help but feel the echo of that same shape. Here for an instant, gone before we can know, a presence we glimpse but cannot hold. Soon, we will face a stranger clue still, where the silence of space folds into geometry, and where anomalies sometimes hide in the very patterns we overlook. Carrying this thread onward, we enter the long years that followed the summer of 1977, the years in which astronomers turned their attention again and again to the patch of sky where the wow signal had once lived. If the first moment felt like a shout, sudden, startling, impossible to ignore, Then what came after was silence, drawn out across decades. And silence, in its own way, speaks. Radio telescopes were pointed back toward Sagittarius, again and again. Some campaigns lasted weeks, others months. Sensitive arrays listened for hours at a time, combing through frequencies near the hydrogen line, the natural frequency that many believed would be the cosmic lingua franca. The logic was simple. If another intelligence wanted to be found, perhaps they too would recognize hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe, as a meeting place, a neutral frequency where no one could fail to notice. And so the listening continued. Dishes turned, receivers cooled, data scrolled. But no voice returned. Nothing like that 72-second burst was ever heard again. The numbers filled page after page, line after line, all quiet, all empty of the extraordinary. For the scientists, this was both expected and disheartening. Expected, because the sky is wide and the signals rare. Disheartening, because one glimpse without a follow-up cannot become a foundation. Theories rose like small flames, then burned out. Some argued it was truly artificial, a deliberate beacon, perhaps not aimed at us, but spilling across our orbit by chance, caught in the moment when Earth rotated into alignment. Others suggested it was a one-time transmission, a message sent centuries ago and already extinguished at its source, the final echo of a civilization that might not even exist anymore. To imagine that possibility is to imagine hearing a farewell from across the stars, a goodbye never meant for us, caught by accident, preserved in a strip of red-inked paper. Others, more cautious, turned to natural explanations. Perhaps the signal came from a comet, hydrogen released in just the right way, at just the right intensity. Yet, when this was tested, when astronomers tried to replicate the shape and strength of the WOW spike with cometary emissions, the fit was uneasy. The signal was narrower than expected, more focused, too precise to align cleanly with nature's usual handwriting. Perhaps it was a satellite reflection or an unusual alignment of radio interference. Again, possibilities, but again, none fit completely. The silence that followed was not empty. It was weighted. Each non-detection became its own kind of answer, each failed attempt reinforcing the strangeness of the original event. If the signal were ordinary, we should have heard it again. If it were interference, it should have left fingerprints we could recognize. If it were natural, it should not have been so clean, so narrow, so deliberate in its shape. The absence itself became the haunting presence, a void around the event that gave it more substance. You, listening now, might feel the strange duality of this absence. On one side, it is a denial. There is nothing here, nothing repeating, nothing to confirm our hopes. On the other, it is an invitation. Something happened once. It was not explained. And in its failure to appear again, it takes on the character of a riddle, a pattern broken by silence. Scientists learned to live with this tension. They balanced skepticism with a fragile thread of wonder. Conferences would mention the WOW signal, always with caveats, always with caution, but never dismissing it entirely. Students would be told the story as both an example and a warning. This is how anomalies appear. This is how they tempt you. This is how they endure. Do not leap too quickly. Do not dismiss too quickly. Keep listening, but keep your balance. And all the while, the image of that circled cluster in red endured. 6EQUJ5, a code etched into the history of astronomy, an artifact of listening. It became less about proof and more about the reminder of possibility, that the universe is vast, that the unexpected may come and go without warning, that silence is not always empty. Perhaps the silence itself was the answer. Perhaps the signal was never meant to repeat. Perhaps it was a one-time flare, a coincidence of geometry, Earth's rotation sliding through the beam of a faraway transmitter like a ship crossing a lighthouse beam, seeing it once, never again. Or perhaps it was only the noise of our own machines, disguised for a moment as something more. But absence has power. The silence after the shout has lasted far longer than the signal itself. 72 seconds versus 47 years. A ratio that bends the weight of meaning toward the quiet. We carry the wow signal less as evidence and more as story. A myth in the making, rooted in real data, but stretched by absence into a shape larger than the original event. This is why astronomers sometimes say, the wow signal is not just a detection, but a mirror. It reflects back at us our own readiness to believe, our own hunger for connection, our own patience in waiting for a voice that may or may not come. In the silence, we hear ourselves, our caution, our longing, our humility. Maybe it was only hydrogen. Maybe it was only chance. Maybe it was nothing at all. Or maybe it was the closest we have yet come to hearing a mind other than our own. That uncertainty still waits, quietly threaded through the silence, unresolved, unresolved, unresolved. And as we turn our eyes from signals to objects, from the fleeting voice to the passing visitor, we find the same shape repeating. Something appears once, briefly. Something strange, not quite fitting, not quite explained. Then it vanishes, and the silence grows around it. What if visitors come not only as signals, but as objects? What if the universe does not always speak in voices, but sometimes in fragments of ice, in shards of rock, in fading trails of dust? Soon, we will face that question directly as we place the wow signal beside the travelers like three-eye atlas and wonder whether both are different forms of the same unbroken mystery. Imagine for a moment that the wow signal was not the only way a voice could travel. We tend to picture communication across the stars as radio, as bursts of frequency, as coded pulses, as waves of energy sent out to be caught by distant ears. That is our heritage. We discovered radio only a century ago, and so it has become our lens, our favored instrument of imagination. But what if other civilizations, older or different, choose other mediums? What if their handwriting is not in radio, but in matter itself? Objects, not signals. Stones instead of syllables. A fragment of cometary ice drifting through space might not seem like a letter. A faint streak across the telescopic eye does not feel like a conversation. Yet consider how strange it is already that two interstellar objects, Oumuamua and Borisov, appeared within just a few years of each other, after millions of years without a single confirmed visitor. And then, in quiet sequence, another arrived. Three-Eye Atlas. Each came in the moment when humanity had, at last, the telescopes and the sensitivity to notice. It is tempting to ask, is that coincidence? Or is the timing itself a kind of whisper? Civilizations might measure readiness not by words, but by instruments. They might wait until a young world has reached a certain threshold of awareness, a certain precision in watching the sky. Then, at that threshold, a marker arrives. Not loudly, not with fireworks, just quietly, slipping across the darkness, waiting to be noticed. This would be a different kind of language, not made of tones, but of presence, not a broadcast, but a geometry. The way an orbit bends, the way an object brightens, the way it fades, could all be part of the script, a message hidden in motion. You might think of it like a bottle at sea. The ocean itself is vast, empty, unbroken. But one day, A bottle washes ashore. The bottle itself is not the letter is inside. Yet, to see the bottle at all is already a message. Someone, somewhere, has cast it adrift. The question is not only, what does it say, but why here, why now? Objects could be physical letters in the same way. They might not need to contain anything exotic or technological inside. The message could be their mere arrival. We exist. We have passed this way. We know you are watching. This thought is both wondrous and disarming. It shifts the burden of interpretation onto us. If the wow signal demanded we decode a fleeting radio spike, objects ask us to interpret their timing, their strangeness, their very being. They require us to sit with the possibility that the universe writes not in one script, but in many. Light, radio, geometry, dust. And so the wonder grows softer. Do they know when we are ready to look? Did someone, somewhere, decide to let their fragments drift toward us only when we had opened our eyes wide enough to see them? If so, then our telescopes are not just instruments of science, but invitations. Lanterns in the night sky that signal, we are here. We are listening. It may be nothing. Only ice, only rock, only dust. And yet, is that not how anomalies often begin? A faint deviation, a timing too neat, a silence too weighted. If objects are messages, then we are at the earliest stage of literacy, just learning to suspect that there may be handwriting hidden in the drift. Consider how radio signals demand interpretation. We search for modulation, repetition, structure. With objects, perhaps the interpretation is subtler. Arrival in clusters, decline in brightness faster than expected, orbits bent in ways that suggest intention. Each detail might be part of a larger word, a phrase spelled across decades, written not in seconds, but in centuries. It requires patience to read. It requires humility to even imagine reading. But patience and humility are the same virtues that science itself demands. And so the speculation is not a break from science. It is its quiet companion, the part of the mind that dares to ask, what if? While the equations measure what is, the wow signal was a shout that became silence. Interstellar objects are whispers that become questions. Together, they sketch a new possibility, that visitors may come not only as voices in the radio night, but as bodies crossing our sunlit doorway, and so we circle back to Three-Eye Atlas. Faint, fragile, slipping past us almost unnoticed. Its geometry, its timing, its silence, all might be part of a larger story. If objects can be messages, then perhaps Atlas carries one of its own, written not in words, but in the quiet language of presence. We are only beginning to learn how to listen. From here, the mystery begins to arrange itself in a rhythm. Not one note, not two, but three, a sequence unfolding slowly across the backdrop of cosmic silence. When astronomers first spotted an object falling through our solar system from beyond the stars, it seemed almost miraculous, a once-in-an-era anomaly. Oumuamua, the first interstellar visitor confirmed, came as a scout. It darted through our system in 2017, tumbling oddly, accelerating in ways that left scientists unsettled. Some called it a shard of rock, some a fragment of ice, some even whispering cautiously, something engineered. Whatever it was, it left us with questions, and then it was gone. Not long after, the second appeared. Borisov, unlike the enigmatic Oumuamua, was unambiguous in its nature. A comet, but not of our kind. Its coma, its tail, its behavior, all declared it as something familiar, yet foreign. A comet, born in another star system, carrying with it the dust of a place we may never see. Borisov was, in a sense, reassurance, a reminder that interstellar visitors were not always inexplicable riddles. Sometimes they were simply cosmic wanderers. It grounded the mystery in something natural, yet even so, it deepened the wonder. If two could arrive within years of each other, how many more must drift through the dark unnoticed? And then the third, 3I Atlas. Fainter, more fragile, so dim that even its discovery felt like a whisper almost lost. Where Oumuamua had startled and Borisov had confirmed, Atlas did something quieter. It unsettled by its subtlety. Its brightness declined more quickly than expected, as if it were falling apart even as we tried to understand it. Its path and presence made it different. Not the dramatic first, not the definitive second, but a hesitant third, almost shy in its arrival. 3. It is a simple number, yet it resonates across cultures, across mythologies, across sciences. The geometry of triads holds a special power. In stories, the pattern of 3 carries weight. The first event introduces, the second establishes, the third delivers meaning. Myths are built on this structure. 3 trials, 3 brothers, 3 wishes. Science, too, often leans on repetition. Once can be chance, twice coincidence, but 3 suggests a pattern forming, a rule emerging. Even in signal processing, engineers will tell you that 3 points are enough to begin discerning a structure in noise. With 3, geometry begins to take shape. With 3, you can draw a line, trace a trend, suggest intent. And so, in the quiet company of these interstellar arrivals, the question emerges: is the pattern of 3 only chance, or is it the shape of something more deliberate? The first, the scout; the second, the comet; the third, the faint messenger. It could be nothing more than the natural statistics of discovery. The fact that our eyes are sharper, our telescopes wider, our data more finely tuned than ever before. It could be that countless others have passed unseen, and only now do we have the skill to notice. But if that is true, then the timing itself is meaningful. Only now, in our age of readiness, when we can recognize them for what they are, the messengers appear. 3 in a row, as though a rhythm is being tapped gently against the edge of our awareness. Triads also whisper through philosophy. 1 defines a point, 2 create a line, 3 create a plane. The beginning of structure, the birth of geometry itself. With 3, space is no longer empty, it is articulated. Perhaps, in this way, the arrival of 3 interstellar visitors in such short succession feels less like chaos and more like structure, as though the universe were sketching the faint outline of a message just beyond our comprehension. And yet, humility is necessary. Perhaps the pattern is only in our minds, a reflection of the human tendency to weave meaning where there is none. We see faces in clouds, animals in constellations, intention in coincidence. Perhaps these 3 arrivals are no more than statistical inevitability. The universe is vast. Why should it not throw 3 stones across our path in quick succession? Still, the weight of 3 lingers. It refuses to be dismissed so easily. The rhythm calls to something older in us, something that listens not with instruments, but with story. It reminds us that sometimes the universe communicates not in words or signals, but in shapes, in repetitions, in patterns that seem to lean toward us as if waiting to be read. And so one might wonder, perhaps the hidden message is not in the first or the second, but in the third. Perhaps Oumuamua was only the opening knock, Borisov the steadying note, and Atlas the one that carried meaning. Or perhaps the meaning is not in any single object, but in the fact that there are 3, aligned across time, spelling something in their very sequence. 1, then 2, then 3. A quiet geometry drawn across the stage of our solar system. If we are to see these not only as objects, but as signs, then the third carries a special weight. In human story, the third is often the turning point, the resolution, the place where something hidden is finally revealed. Maybe Atlas is not just a faint, crumbling, comet-like traveler, but the subtle completion of a phrase that began years earlier. Not a period at the end of a sentence, but a pivot, pointing us toward the next question. What comes after 3? For now, we wait. 3 is enough to wonder, but not enough to conclude. The universe writes slowly, in epochs and centuries. Our role is only to notice, to hold the possibility open, to recognize that even in silence, patterns may be forming. Soon we will ask, what hidden shapes might Atlas itself carry? What geometry lies folded in its path? From here, the silence unfolds into a more intricate shape. Not just a sequence of arrivals, but a geometry quietly drawn against the canvas of space. When we look at the sky, it often appears as a scattering of stars without pattern, a vastness too immense for structure. Yet the human mind, and perhaps the universe itself, cannot help but arrange points into forms. Triangles, arcs, alignments. These become our way of reading meaning in the void. Since antiquity, observers have marked the heavens by their angles. Planetary conjunctions, when 2 or more wanderers meet in the same region of the sky, have been treated as omens, as signs. The Babylonians traced cycles of Venus against the backdrop of the sun, watching for repeating alignments. The Greeks studied the Pythagorean harmonies of orbital ratios, believing the spheres themselves sang in numbers. Even in modern times, astronomers track not only the objects themselves, but the patterns they inscribe. Curves of comets, conjunctions of gas giants, eclipses that repeat with precise cadence. Geometry becomes a language, written in lines and intersections, circles and triangles. Unlike words, it needs no translation. An angle, a ratio, a symmetry is the same in every culture, on every world. A triangle drawn in starlight is still a triangle, whether you are human or something else. It might be, as many mathematicians have suggested, the only truly universal alphabet, a grammar of space itself. So when we turn to our 3 interstellar visitors, a thought emerges. Could their positions, their sequence form more than coincidence? Imagine them not as isolated wanderers, but as points on a page. With 1, there is nothing to compare. With 2, a line. With 3, suddenly, a plane. The simplest geometry, the birth of pattern. Oumuamua, Borisov, Atlas. 3 arrivals, drawn across the last decade. Each came from a different direction. Each carried its own nature, and yet together they form a quiet set. A triangle across time, not in visible space, perhaps, but in the symbolic geometry of history. One could even imagine these 3 as the vertices of an invisible figure, a shape that stretches not across the sky, but across human awareness. Angles that seem accidental may not be. In the silence of space, even small repetitions stand out like a rhythm tapped against an otherwise endless quiet. A line extended too perfectly, an alignment too precise, a sequence too ordered. These invite us to wonder whether something deliberate lingers beneath the surface. Perhaps, in some sense, the arrivals themselves are the message. It could be, of course, only randomness. The orbits of interstellar debris are governed by chance encounters in ancient star systems, the chaotic tosses of planetary slingshots, the silent push of stellar tides. We cannot rule out that what looks like order is simply our longing for it. But then again, this is how messages hide. in the very space between what might be random and what might not. You, drifting now in thought, might consider how geometry itself feels inevitable. Even if no intention lies behind these three arrivals, we still frame them as a set, a sequence, a shape. Our minds are compelled to draw the lines, to whisper to ourselves, 1, 2, 3. It is not merely superstition. It is the mathematics of perception. With 3 points, a structure is unavoidable. Civilizations have long looked for geometry as the signature of intelligence. In radio astronomy, researchers sometimes speak of signals that arrive in prime numbers, a sequence that nature rarely produces, but which intellect easily does. In ancient monuments, triangular alignments of stones across landscapes hinted at intention, at planning, at messages embedded not in words, but in forms. Perhaps, in a similar way, interstellar arrivals can be read as part of a larger inscription, one that is still unfolding. Consider, too, that alignments across time carry as much weight as alignments across space. The fact that these three arrived within a human lifetime is itself geometry of a sort. Not spatial, but temporal, a symmetry of moments. In a universe where stars burn for billions of years, what are the odds that 3 visitors would present themselves in such a narrow span of human attention? Was it mere luck, or was it a rhythm, a timing, a clock set to strike when our telescopes were ready? And if alignments can whisper meaning, then perhaps they whisper more than we have yet learned to hear. Angles across star systems, ratios of orbits, conjunctions of comets, all these could be as intentional as words on a page, if only one knew the language. Maybe the true challenge is not whether messages are there, but whether we can still ourselves long enough to listen in a form beyond sound. In the end, geometry is patient. The triangle waits, whether or not we see it. The alignments unfold, whether or not we read them as messages. But the possibility remains that in their very arrangement, in the hush of their sequence, the visitors are not simply accidents of wandering rock, but signs written in a language older than speech. And perhaps the question is not whether we can decode the shape, but whether the act of noticing is itself the first step toward conversation. To trace the triangle, to pause at the alignment, is already to participate in a dialogue with the unknown. Soon, we will press closer to this possibility. We will wonder if geometry itself, the orbits, the angles, the hidden ratios, could be a deliberate form of expression. For now, the pattern of 3 lingers like a quiet chord in the background, asking us to listen differently, to see not only the objects, but the shapes they form. From here, the thought extends outward, into the invisible handwriting of orbits themselves. When we trace the path of a comet, we do more than map a physical trajectory. We sketch a line across the darkness, a pen stroke on the vast page of the cosmos. The arc of 3-Eye Atlas, like every interstellar traveler, is not just movement. It is inscription. Each curve, each deflection, each vanishing angle carries the potential of being read, if only one has the patience to linger with it. Astronomers often render these paths into visualizations, glowing threads winding around the sun, bending in elegant loops, breaking outward into infinity again. From above, they resemble calligraphy, delicate flourishes written across a black canvas. In those plots, time itself becomes a kind of ink, revealing where the object has been and where it is bound to go. We are accustomed to reading orbits as data, but one can also pause and see them as shapes, perhaps even as coded figures. The language of ratios lies at the heart of this. Planets dance in resonances, Jupiter and Saturn in their slow cycles, Neptune and Pluto locked in a 3-2 rhythm. Moons echo this same harmony, tugging each other into stable alignments, as though the universe prefers whole number ratios, a hidden preference embedded in gravity itself. Resonances are the way orbits speak to one another and to us. They are, in a sense, the grammar of celestial motion. What if interstellar objects, too, are part of such a sentence, not born of our solar system, yet written into its page for a moment, inscribing one or two careful lines before departing? To most eyes, they are random intrusions, streaks through our orderly circles. But to another kind of reading, they might be more deliberate strokes, joining with others into a sketch we cannot yet decipher. A comet's arc could be nothing more than gravity's hand, or it could be a line in a quiet geometry we have not learned to read. Consider the history of speculation in astronomy. When astronomers noticed faint smudges near Earth, they once wondered if these were the Kordylewski clouds, subtle accumulations of dust at gravitational balance points, almost invisible yet real enough to leave their trace. Later, as technology advanced, the imagination reached further. Dyson spheres, enormous megastructures around stars, hypothesized not from direct sight, but from odd ratios of missing starlight. These ideas began not with certainty, but with suspicion that patterns in orbital or luminous data could be more than accidents, could be signatures of intention. It is in this same spirit that one might pause over 3I Atlas. Its brightness declined more sharply than expected, its path faint and fragile compared to Borisov's comet-like robustness. When charted, its course feels delicate, almost hesitant, as though written with a lighter pen than the others. The line it leaves in our records is thinner, less bold, but no less a part of the page. To see orbits as code is to imagine intention behind repetition, ratios that recur, alignments that mirror, arcs that echo one another across decades. These may be the hidden marks. We might not yet know the cipher, but we can at least acknowledge the possibility that such a cipher could exist. A child looking at constellations once saw hunters, bears, and queens. Perhaps one day, astronomers may look at interstellar trajectories and see letters, words, sentences written across generations. And what of the timescales? Messages inscribed in orbits need not be read quickly. Unlike radio bursts that vanish in seconds, orbital inscriptions linger. They remain in the archives, in plotted charts, waiting for comparison. One object in 2017, another in 2019, another again in 2020. If a pattern exists, it is not in the instant, but in the accumulation, the quiet patience of repetition. The universe might speak not in shouts, but in whispers carried over decades. Perhaps the question is whether we are the intended readers. A comet's arc is visible to anyone with a telescope, but only a civilization primed to notice anomalies would think to ask if the arc itself carries meaning. In that sense, the very act of curiosity, the decision to search orbital databases, to overlay paths, to look for resonances, may be what allows the code to emerge. You, listening now, might sense that subtle shift, how the cosmos could be waiting, not for our ears, but for our awareness. Skepticism, of course, must remain our compass. It is easy to see patterns where none exist. The human mind, built for survival, has always been tuned to find shapes in clouds, faces in shadows, order in randomness. Yet science itself began by noticing such shapes and testing whether they held. Some did not, but some, the ratios of planets, the geometry of eclipses, the repeating arcs of comets, proved real, and in them we discovered the laws of motion. If natural laws can be uncovered through patient attention to geometry, then why not also the possibility of intention, hidden in the same fabric? We cannot say with certainty that 3i Atlas's orbit is part of a message. But neither can we rule out the idea that meaning might sometimes ride along with motion. Perhaps the geometry is waiting to be noticed. Perhaps the code is written not for clarity, but for those who choose to wonder. Soon, we will carry this wondering further, into the deeper speculation of how such alignments, ratios, and echoes might not merely sketch beauty, but whisper design. For now, the faint curve of Atlas drifts across our charts like a quiet line of handwriting in a book too vast to finish, suggesting that the language of orbits may be more than mechanics. It may be poetry. There are moments when the universe feels as though it is speaking a language too vast for words, not in syllables or voices, but in something more elemental, in number, in ratio, in the recurrence of patterns across both stone temples and stellar skies. Human beings have always turned to numbers when words failed. We carved them into monuments, inscribed them in calendars, wove them into our architecture, and whispered them in prayers. And yet, beyond the fragile borders of culture, mathematics waits. The same here, the same everywhere. To compare the numbers of human tradition with the constants of the cosmos is to glimpse a bridge, one that might connect minds across unimaginable distances. Numbers hold a double life. On one side, they belong to us, the human imagination, invested with meaning by myth and tradition. The ancient builders of Egypt and Greece saw in the golden ratio, phi, a principle of harmony that shaped temples, statues, and sacred diagrams. Circles and triangles became symbols not merely of geometry, but of divinity. Medieval architects echoed these ratios in cathedrals, believing that mathematics was not just a tool but a prayer, a way of aligning earthly stone with heavenly order. On the other side, numbers belong to the universe itself. Long before humans found meaning in them, the constants of physics had already been written into the stars. Pi, the ratio of circumference to diameter, governs every circle, whether in a child's drawing or the horizon of a black hole. Phi, too, emerges in the spirals of galaxies, the patterns of sunflower seeds, the curves of nautilus shells. The hydrogen line, that quiet frequency at 1420 MHz, hums across interstellar space, a natural beacon born of the universe's most abundant element. These numbers existed before we recognized them, and they will endure long after us. This is why scientists searching for extraterrestrial intelligence have so often turned to mathematics as the imagined bridge. Words differ, symbols vary, but primes are primes everywhere. A signal constructed of prime number sequences would not be mistaken for noise. Carl Sagan once remarked that mathematics is the language of the universe, and in SETI's dreams, that language might one day become our common ground. Imagine it. Across hundreds of light years, a civilization wishing to announce its presence might not send words or images, but pulses, repeating rhythms that encode the sequence of prime numbers, or ratios pointing toward pi, or patterns that gesture toward the hydrogen line. Such a signal would not require translation into culture. It would simply be understood as intentional, as the hand of mind reaching through the static. But numbers are not only the property of science. They are also the heartbeat of the sacred. From Pythagoras onward, the mystery schools of many civilizations have treated number as a hidden truth, a doorway into the divine. The 3, the 4, the 7, the 12, recurring across myths and rituals, across calendars and prophecies, triads in gods and stories, 7 days of creation, 7 notes in the scale, 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 disciples, 12 months in a year. These numbers too recur, return, remain. It is tempting to dismiss this as coincidence, as the human habit of pattern making. But perhaps it is something deeper. The resonance between our search for meaning and the structures already woven into the world. The same phi that shaped a spiral galaxy may have whispered into a temple builder's intuition. The same pi that governs planetary orbits guided the mason's compass. Sacred geometry may not have been wrong, only poetic, reaching toward truths later expressed in equations. When we place these strands together, a question arises. If humanity sees number as both sacred and scientific, might another civilization see it the same way? Would they too have discovered phi in their shells, pi in their circles, primes in their mathematics? Would they also find in these constants the perfect medium for communication, not merely technical but symbolic? Perhaps the message, if there is one, is not in radio bursts or stone pyramids, but in the meeting point where science and myth converge. In numbers that recur not because of us, but because of the universe itself. Listen to the cadence. Numbers recur. Numbers return. Numbers remain. Numbers recur in the circles of planets, endlessly tracing their paths. Numbers return in the harmonies of orbits, the way Jupiter and Saturn tug one another into rhythm. Numbers remain in the constants that do not change, the ratios that will outlast stars themselves. It is not difficult to imagine that three-eye Atlas, like Oumuamua before it, might whisper to us not through its brightness or silence, but through its alignment with such numbers, the timing of its arrival, the geometry of its path, the ratios hidden in its trajectory. To us, it looks like a fragment of ice. To another way of reading, perhaps it is a physical glyph, a number written across the solar system's page. If a civilization wished to be subtle, they might not shout across the cosmos. They might instead lay numbers like breadcrumbs, scattered across decades, awaiting recognition. Not noise, not words, but resonance. Patterns meant to be noticed not by all, but by those who wait, who wonder, who listen with patience to the rhythm of recurrence. In this way, numbers themselves become the bridge. They belong to no one, yet they are shared by all. They are human and more than human. They are culture and cosmos together. We may never know whether the arc of Three-Eye Atlas carries such intention, or whether we only project meaning into silence. But what remains undeniable is this: numbers endure. They endure across civilizations, across galaxies, across time. And so, when we look upward, at orbits, at signals, at mysteries half seen, we carry with us the hope that someone, somewhere, might also be looking at the same ratios, the same frequencies, the same sacred geometry written into the bones of reality. Numbers recur. Numbers return. Numbers remain. Now, carrying the thought of numbers forward, there is another dimension to consider. Not what is present, but what is absent. Not the ratios and arcs we can trace, but the blank spaces that remain when something slips beyond our sight. In music, silence shapes the melody as much as sound. In painting, empty space allows form to breathe. And in the great canvas of the cosmos, silence may be more than a void. It may be a kind of code, written not in presence but in absence. Artists across cultures have always known this. In the brushwork of East Asian ink paintings, the unpainted white space is not emptiness, but living space. The mist, the air, the suggestion of worlds beyond the frame. In architecture, the pause between columns defines the rhythm as much as the columns themselves. Even in sacred geometry, what is missing carries meaning. A circle incomplete draws the eye to its gap. A triangle with one point absent suggests a direction outward. Absence speaks, if we are willing to listen. Astronomy, too, is shaped by this principle. We often detect objects, not by what they emit, but by what they block. An exoplanet transiting its star reveals itself by a dimming. A brief subtraction of light, a whisper of shadow across the stellar blaze. Black holes announce their presence not through visibility, but through the distortion and disappearance of what lies around them. Even in cosmic microwave background radiation, it is the subtle variations, the absences from perfect uniformity, that encode the story of the universe's birth. In this way, silence becomes a form of information, the missing note in a chord, the vanished star in a field. The interruption in a pattern, each can be a message, though it may not feel like one at first glance. Consider 3I Atlas. For a brief span, it became part of our record, a faint, comet-like guest slipping into the solar system's corridor. And then, as if retreating, it passed behind the sun. In that moment, it did not exist for us. Our instruments, so carefully tuned, could not pierce the blaze. The object was gone, hidden in the overwhelming light. And yet perhaps this disappearance was not only an obstacle. Perhaps the very act of vanishing into brightness, of leaving us with silence instead of signal, is itself part of the rhythm. It is tempting to think of this in human terms. A friend sending a letter might choose to leave a line blank, a word omitted, a pause in speech that means more than the words around it. Poets know the power of absence, of what is withheld. Could a cosmic intelligence, if such a thing exists, also use silence as a brushstroke? Could a vanishing object be as intentional as a visible one? We do not need to leap to extraordinary speculation to feel the weight of this. Even in the most ordinary sense, the gap in observation is as real as the observation itself. Astronomers keep records of where comets vanish behind the sun, because the reappearance, or the lack of it, becomes data. A comet that does not return, a fragment that fails to emerge, tells a story of disintegration. The silence is the report. The absence is the truth. But in the stillness of thought, we might wonder, what if such vanishings can also be seen as part of a larger cycle of communication? Perhaps silence is not an interruption, but a note held longer than we expect. The universe, after all, may speak slowly, in centuries, in millennia, in arcs too wide for a single human life to read. What feels to us like disappearance may, on another scale, be deliberate spacing, the pause between phrases in a sentence written across starfields. Negative space in art, gaps in geometry, disappearances in orbit. These may all mirror the same principle, that what is not there can still carry meaning. When 3I Atlas slipped behind the sun, it entered that region where absence becomes luminous, where we are forced to imagine what cannot be seen. To lose sight of it was to hold a question without an answer. And perhaps that is what the universe offers us most often. Not conclusions, but openings. What if absence is the message? The phrase lingers, unsettling and soft. For if absence can be a message, then every silence we have met, the wow signal that shouted once and never again, the interstellar objects that arrive and then dissolve, could be more than failure. They could be deliberate ellipses, pauses in a dialogue too vast for us to yet comprehend. Think of the intervals between heartbeats. Life is not in the contraction alone, but in the rhythm, the spaces between pulses. Think of breathing. It is not only the inhale, but the stillness before the next breath that defines its pattern. If the cosmos breathes, perhaps these silences, these vanishings, are its rhythm. And for you, drifting now through these thoughts, there is a strange comfort in it. To know that silence need not be emptiness, that absence may hold as much presence as a signal. You may not hear the words, but the pause invites you to lean in, to wait, to wonder. In this way, the story of 3I Atlas is not merely about what it was, faint, fragile, comet-like. It is also about what it was not, when it slipped behind the sun, when it left us with a question instead of an answer. That gap is as much a part of its legacy as the brief light we recorded. Soon we will return to the visible, to geometry, to patterns, to what can be charted. But for now, let the silence itself linger. The code may not be written only in numbers or alignments. It may also be carved in what is missing, in the spaces left deliberately blank. And if that is true, then every disappearance, every quiet, every absence becomes something more, an invitation to keep listening. From here, the silence opens into another layer, and it carries us back to the body of the traveler itself. Three-eye Atlas, faint, fragile, and uncertain in its shape. Unlike planets, with their enduring heft, or even asteroids, with their solid cores of stone and metal, Atlas appears as something far more delicate. Its body is not a fortress, but a breath, a tenuous collection of ice and dust, moving through the furnace of interstellar space. One might picture it less as a stone in flight and more as a cloud with a direction, a whisper carried by gravity's invisible currents. The evidence for its fragility comes not only from observation, but from the deep history of comets themselves. Comets are bodies built in the cold, born far from the sun, where water, carbon dioxide, and ammonia remain locked in solid form. Held together only loosely, like powder bound by frost, they are vulnerable the moment they approach a star. When heated, they shed layers of themselves in fountains of vapor. Dust streams outward, tails bloom, and in some cases, entire nuclei fracture under the strain. Atlas, by all appearances, was no exception. Its brightness dimmed faster than expected, its surface too fragile to withstand even the distant warmth of our sun. There are echoes of this fragility in other histories. In 1992, astronomers watched comet Shoemaker Levy 9 fracture into more than 20 pieces after a close encounter with Jupiter. Its orbit had carried it too near the gas giant's massive pull. The tidal forces tore it apart, and the fragments strung themselves out like a necklace of glass beads across the black canvas of space. 2 years later, in 1994, those fragments plunged into Jupiter's atmosphere one by one, leaving dark scars larger than Earth itself. It was a reminder that a comet's life is not always gentle, that fragility can end in sudden fire. Atlas did not meet Jupiter, but its frailty was apparent in subtler ways. It flared, then dimmed, its brightness behaving as if its nucleus was coming apart. The signature of fragmentation is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a gradual unraveling, an object's light curve telling the story of disintegration in soft decline. And in this way, Atlas revealed itself not as a messenger built for endurance, but as a traveler barely holding together under the stresses of speed, sunlight, and rotation. This fragility, of course, supports the most straightforward interpretation. Atlas is only a comet, one more in a long lineage of such objects that wander in and out of our solar system. Its nature would be ordinary, and its fate predictable. For every comet that flares bright in our skies, many more crumble unseen, their substance scattered into streams of dust that may someday become meteor showers. It is tempting, then, to place Atlas in this category, no more remarkable than others of its kind. Sometimes, as the saying goes, a whisper is only wind, and yet even this ordinary story carries quiet wonder. To travel interstellar space as such a fragile body is extraordinary. Imagine a snowflake enduring a hurricane, or a candle's flame carried across a storm. Atlas, or what remains of it, moved at tens of kilometers per second, across distances where starlight itself takes years to cross. For such a thing to survive at all, even in fragments, is remarkable. Fragility does not diminish the mystery. Sometimes it deepens it, reminding us of the improbable endurance of delicate forms in a harsh cosmos. The mind drifts, too, to the symbolic weight of fragility. A fragile object does not last long, and so its presence is all the more precious. Ancient comets inspired awe not only because they appeared bright and sudden, but because they vanished quickly, leaving nothing but memory behind. Their impermanence was part of their message. Perhaps Atlas fits into this tradition, whether as an ordinary comet or something more, a fleeting presence, one that reminds us of how temporary all encounters with the beyond might be. Astronomers, cautious and precise, remind us not to project intention onto natural breakups. The stresses of sunlight, the spin of rotation, the uneven release of gases, all these can conspire to fracture a comet. Atlas may simply be another example of this endless process, and still, one cannot help but linger on the metaphor. A fragile visitor that shatters even as it enters our awareness, leaving us with the question of whether we saw the whole story or only fragments of something larger. You, listening now, may sense the paradox. Fragility both explains and conceals. It explains the dimming, the crumbling, the erratic brightness. But it also conceals the possibility that in the shards and silences, some other pattern lies hidden. The natural and the unnatural overlap like shadows, each borrowing the shape of the other. Perhaps Atlas was only dust. Perhaps it was more. Perhaps it was both. In this way, fragility itself becomes part of the message, whether intentional or not. The body of Atlas reminds us that not all travelers endure, that not all voices are loud, and that sometimes the most delicate whispers carry the most haunting questions. And soon, as we look more closely, we must weigh the balance more carefully between the explanations of ice and gravity and the possibilities that reach beyond them. For if sometimes a whisper is only wind, at other times it may be something else, something waiting in the fragile body of a visitor from the dark. Carrying this thought onward, the path bends toward another presence in the story. Not the fragile body of the traveler itself, but the voices that stand beside it, steady and grounded, reminding us to tread carefully. For every mystery that opens, there is a counterweight, and it is often skepticism that provides that anchor. In the long history of astronomy, the skeptical voice has been less a silencing force and more a balancing one, urging patience in a universe that rarely surrenders its secrets quickly. Skeptics remind us of Occam's razor, the principle that when faced with competing explanations, the simplest one is usually correct. In the case of 3i Atlas, that simplest path is clear. It is a comet, fragile and ordinary, breaking apart as countless others have before. To weave a tale of hidden geometry or messages encoded in its arc may sound alluring, but the razor cuts through, saying that nature's chaos requires no hand of intention. It is not dismissal, but a reminder. Probability alone suggests that most things we encounter will fall within the bounds of the natural. Astronomy, after all, is a science born in patience. Stars rise and set, but their true changes unfold over centuries. Planets move, but their cycles require careful recording across years before patterns emerge. Even comets, sudden in appearance, are only understood when countless observations are compared and tested, piece by piece. Skeptics hold close to this tradition, reminding us that single anomalies are not enough. A brightening curve here, a strange dimming there. Such things can tempt the imagination, but they can also mislead. To lean too quickly into wonder without grounding risks, mistaking coincidence for code, accident for intention. There is also the weight of probability. The vastness of space ensures that countless icy fragments drift between stars. When one crosses our view, it may seem extraordinary, but in the calculus of large numbers, it is simply inevitable. If a few behave oddly, it is not necessarily evidence of messages. It is just as likely to be chance. Fragility, breakage, unusual light curves, all these exist in abundance within the catalog of comets. The skeptic's anchor insists we remember this context, that one traveler's strangeness does not overturn the expected patterns of billions. And yet, the tone of skepticism is not harsh. It is calm, measured, almost gentle. Doubt in this setting is not denial. It is a form of waiting. Astronomers know the universe speaks slowly, and many mysteries that seem insoluble today may be answered tomorrow by new instruments, better data, or wider surveys. To leap too far into speculation risks disappointment, but to wait allows clarity to arrive in its own time. Doubt, then, becomes a kind of patience, a willingness to hold the question open without forcing it closed by premature answers. There is also humility in skepticism. The cosmos has humbled humanity before again and again. Once we thought Earth the center of all things. Later, we thought our sun was alone, our galaxy unique. Each time, the universe revealed itself to be wider, stranger, more indifferent to our expectations. Skepticism carries this humility forward. If the universe has taught us anything, it is that our assumptions often falter under its immensity. Therefore, the safest course is not to leap too quickly into extraordinary explanations, but to sit with uncertainty, to let the evidence accumulate before daring to declare. You, drifting now with these thoughts, may sense the wisdom in this anchor. It steadies the ship of imagination, preventing it from capsizing under its own sails. Skeptical voices do not end the story. They simply keep it balanced. They say, yes, anomalies are worth attention, but most whispers fade into ordinary wind. Yes, strangeness appears, but often it is an echo of natural processes, not of intention. And yes, it is possible that something more exists. But until the evidence grows firmer, we wait. Still, this anchor does not erase the wonder. Even within skepticism, awe remains. A comet traveling from interstellar space is extraordinary, no matter how ordinary its composition. A fragment of ice and dust surviving across light years is worthy of reflection, even without hidden messages. And a fragile body unraveling under the sun's heat speaks of the delicate balance that governs all things. The skeptic's reminder is not that wonder should vanish, but that it should not be tethered to conclusions too quickly. Awe can stand on its own, unburdened by certainty. Perhaps, then, skepticism is not an adversary of mystery, but its quiet companion. One holds the reins while the other gazes at the horizon. One cautions patience, while the other dares to ask, what if? Together they allow us to move through uncertainty, without collapsing into either dismissal or unchecked fantasy. The skeptic's anchor ensures we remain grounded even as our thoughts drift toward the stars. And so, Atlas remains a puzzle not because skeptics deny its strangeness, but because they remind us how little we yet know. Its fragility is explained, its dimming is natural, its disintegration expected. But perhaps, in the spaces between these natural explanations, something more still lingers. The skeptic says, wait longer. The dreamer says, look closer. The truth may rest in neither extreme, but somewhere in the slow unfolding that only time will reveal. Doubt is not the enemy here. Doubt is the pause, the breath, the interval between questions. Doubt is the silence that allows the universe to continue its slow speech. And within that silence, as we will soon see, other voices may gather, theories that stretch further, daring to imagine that fragility itself could hide intention, that whispers in dust could still carry meaning. If skepticism provides the anchor, wonder is the sail. The two are not enemies but companions, each shaping how we move through the sea of uncertainty. Having heard the voice of caution, it is only natural to let the imagination drift outward again, to explore what lies beyond the horizon of the ordinary. For even skeptics, firm in their grounding, cannot help but admit the strangeness of what has unfolded in the last few years. For billions of years, Earth drifted in the dark without witnessing a single interstellar visitor sweep visibly across its skies. Generations of astronomers searched, built instruments, and measured. Yet the void between stars remained empty of such arrivals. Then, suddenly, as if a curtain were drawn back, 3 wanderers appeared in close succession. First, the enigmatic Oumuamua, then the more familiar Borisov, and now the faint, fragile Atlas. Not 1, not 2, but 3, all within the span of a single human decade. This timing is peculiar. It invites the question, why now? If these objects drift randomly, why did they wait until our instruments became sharp enough, our surveys broad enough, our sky mapping technology advanced enough to notice them? After aeons of silence, the sequence begins just as we are finally able to look. Even the skeptic, while insisting on chance, must pause at the elegance of that coincidence. The pattern of 3 has long held significance, both in myth and in science. In story and symbol, triads form completion, beginning, middle, and end, past, present, and future, birth, life, and death. In mathematics and signal processing, 3 points define a curve. 3 signals confirm a rhythm. It is no wonder, then, that our minds seek meaning in the arrival of 3 interstellar visitors. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps it is everything. But it is difficult to resist the sense that a sequence has been set in motion, one that only now begins to make itself visible. Oumuamua, the first, came like a whisper of strangeness, elongated, tumbling, accelerating in ways not fully explained. It was the scout, the awakener. Borisov, the second, came as the familiar, a comet by every measure, carrying with it the undeniable stamp of natural process. It grounded the story, showing us that interstellar debris does indeed drift among the stars. Then came Atlas, the faint third, fragile, easily overlooked, breaking apart as though to remind us that not every message is carved in stone. If one sought meaning in geometry or sequence, the triad has a resonance difficult to ignore. Why here? Why now? One answer is simple: technology. Our telescopes and surveys, Pan-STARRS, Atlas, Gaia, and others, have widened our eyes. The universe has always been this busy, but only now do we notice. That is the skeptic's truth. Yet the wanderer asks, is there more? Could there be synchronicity in the timing, an alignment not merely of objects and instruments, but of readiness and recognition? Perhaps the question is not whether these travelers are intentional messages, but whether meaning arises in their coincidence with us. If the universe delivers 3 wanderers in such a short span, just as our species learns to watch more closely, is it not natural to feel the resonance? Just as a pause in a song makes the next note more profound, the long silence before these arrivals gives weight to their sudden sequence. Even in science, coincidence is not easily dismissed. Patterns catch the mind's attention, and sometimes what seems like random chance later proves to carry hidden order. Radio astronomers once heard strange pulses they thought might be alien signals. LGM, or little green men. In time, those pulses became known as pulsars, the spinning hearts of collapsed stars. The wonder was not misplaced. It simply pointed toward a different kind of discovery. Coincidence, when approached with openness, can be the spark of revelation. And so it is with Atlas and its companions. Skeptics are right to remind us that probability explains much, but they too must concede that timing shapes perception. After a silence stretching back to the birth of Earth, we are greeted by 3 interstellar wanderers, one after another. If that is mere chance, then chance itself becomes worthy of awe. If it is more, if some resonance lies beneath, then we are perhaps standing at the edge of a new kind of dialogue. Not with voices, but with arrivals. Not with signals, but with presence. Wonder, then, is not about certainty. It does not claim knowledge it does not have. Instead, wonder thrives in the resonance of coincidence, in the space where silence meets arrival, where strangeness stirs, but answers remain just out of reach. It says, perhaps meaning lies not in proof, but in the way patterns awaken us, in the way sequences draw our gaze outward, in the way timing itself whispers. Look closer. This is not about abandoning skepticism, but about allowing awe to breathe alongside it. The skeptic holds us steady. The wanderer lifts our eyes. Together, they allow us to acknowledge both the ordinariness and the extraordinariness of what has happened. 3 travelers, 3 arcs across the sky, 3 reminders that we are not alone in motion through this cosmos. And so we return to the sail, catching wind again after the anchor's pause. The case for wonder does not rest on certainty, but on the undeniable feeling that something has shifted. The universe, once silent, now stirs with arrivals. The silence itself has changed, no longer the same silence we once knew. And in that change, in that pattern, in that resonance of coincidence, meaning may quietly reside. Perhaps the message is not written in letters or encoded in numbers. Perhaps it is written in timing, in sequence, in the very fact that we are watching now and not before. 3 visitors, 3 notes in a chord. And chords, after all, are not single sounds. They are harmonies, vibrations that mean more together than apart. Carrying the thought further, one finds the imagination drawn to a daring possibility that paths themselves could be written, not by accident, but by intent. If nature leaves signatures in the form of comets and asteroids, then could intelligence, somewhere, sometime, choose to bend those signatures into messages, not in radio waves, not in carved monuments, but in the quiet, celestial handwriting of orbital pathways? The idea of a message comet is not entirely foreign to the history of thought. Across cultures, comets have been treated as heralds, as omens, as streaks in the sky that carried meaning beyond their icy cores. In myth, they foretold kings and wars. In science fiction, they became couriers from other stars. In speculation, some even wondered if such objects could be deliberately steered, placed on courses that would eventually carry them into the view of another civilization, perhaps ours. Here, the comet Atlas takes on a different light. Fragile, crumbling, dusted with ice, it seems the very emblem of nature's chance. Yet, when seen against the backdrop of 3 interstellar visitors in quick succession, the whisper of possibility grows. Could one of these paths, perhaps even Atlas itself, be artificial? If so, the engineering would not be obvious. It would be hidden within what already looks natural, concealed within the arc of gravity, cloaked in the simplicity of a comet's fall. How might such steering be achieved? The mind stretches outward into realms of speculation. A civilization far older than ours could, in theory, use subtle propulsion methods to alter the trajectory of small, icy bodies. Not with rockets, not with obvious machines, but with forces that leave little trace. Gentle nudges over vast spans of time, directed jets of gas, controlled releases of energy, even sails that ride the faint push of starlight. Over millennia, such nudges could redirect a comet from one system to another, guiding it like a message in a bottle cast across a cosmic ocean. Orbital mechanics allows this possibility. A slight adjustment at the right place and time magnifies over years into a dramatic redirection. Like touching a spinning wheel at just the right moment, the smallest force could shift the entire outcome. To a patient species, perhaps measuring their history in millions of years, a comet could be as precise a courier as any written script. And yet, if such steering were real, what would the message be? Perhaps not words, but presence. Not syntax, but signal. The act of sending itself would speak, "We were here, and we wish to be known." The pathways would not spell out sentences, but patterns, alignments, timing, things subtle enough to be overlooked, yet profound enough to awaken curiosity. For now, our skepticism rightly reminds us that no sign of artificial engineering has been found. Atlas breaks apart like any fragile body. Its orbit traces back to interstellar space, without markings, without propulsion. To see intention here requires imagination, and perhaps imagination alone. But even so, the question stirs. If not this comet, then could some future one bear that imprint? If not now, then later? Science fiction has long played with this idea. Comets seeded with life, carrying spores across the stars. Comets encoded with mathematics, their structures arranged like crystalline archives. Even comets hollowed and turned into vessels, wandering arcs for civilizations that sought not only to send a message, but to travel themselves. In each of these stories, the pathway was the message, to be seen, to be tracked, to be wondered at. In the quieter corridors of scientific speculation, propulsion concepts emerge that make such thoughts less impossible than they first appear. Solar sails, vast and delicate, might one day redirect small bodies. Nuclear pulses, carefully measured, could alter courses over centuries. Even gravitational assists, using planets as stepping stones, could be calculated with such precision that an object might, in time, arrive exactly where intended. What to us seems improbable might to another species seem trivial, just as navigating oceans was once unthinkable and then became routine. If such a comet were ever proven to have been steered, the implications would be vast. Not fearsome, but wondrous. It would suggest not only that intelligence elsewhere exists, but that it sought to communicate in ways meant to endure. Radio signals fade, light beams scatter, but orbits remain. A comet steered today could still arrive 10,000 years from now, carrying the same message of presence. And so we arrive at the question, if the path of Atlas, or any interstellar visitor, were artificial, what would it be saying? Perhaps nothing more than notice. Perhaps a demonstration of patience, reminding us that not all communication must be immediate, not all dialogues must be spoken. Or perhaps it is part of a larger constellation of meaning, one that requires more arrivals, more patterns, more centuries before the shape becomes clear. It may be, of course, that all such thoughts are illusions, the mind weaving narratives from chance. Maybe Atlas is only ice and dust, breaking apart under the stress of its first close encounter with the sun. Maybe its course is no more than gravity's hand, indifferent and automatic. Maybe, and maybe again. But the question lingers, suspended between doubt and curiosity. To wonder about artificial pathways is not to claim them as real. It is to leave space open, to admit that messages might take forms we do not yet recognize, to concede that silence itself can conceal intention. And if one day such intention were revealed, it would not shatter our understanding, but deepen it. For then we would know that across the darkness, others too have sought ways to speak. Not with noise, but with motion. Not with words, but with the quiet elegance of paths traced in starlight. Perhaps meaning is not in the comet itself, but in the question it leaves behind. The wondering is the signal. The speculation is the dialogue. And as we drift forward, another question waits. If some comet's path were indeed deliberate, then what else in the sky might we need to learn how to read? From here, the question turns inward, away from mechanics and toward meaning. If there were truly a message hidden in pathways, in fragments of ice, or in fleeting alignments, who would it be for? The comet does not whisper its destination. It simply drifts, unconcerned by our eyes, unaware of our wonder. And so we are left to consider whether such a message, if it exists, is meant for us at all, or whether we are simply intercepting a bottle cast into an ocean that was never meant for these particular shores. History gives us analogies, fragile but useful. Across centuries, mariners placed notes into glass, sealing them tight and consigning them to the waves. Sometimes these bottles arrived on distant beaches, opened by strangers who could not recognize the sender, who could not answer, who might not even share the same language. In those moments, the act of communication was both direct and indirect. A message meant for someone, yet received by someone else entirely. Perhaps cosmic messages might be like this, not targeted, but drifting, free, content to reach whoever happens to be watching at the right moment. There is a difference between directed and undirected communication. Directed is the beam of a lighthouse, turning steadily, sweeping the horizon with intent. Undirected is the candle in the window, burning quietly, visible to any who pass. If an object like Atlas carried meaning, would it be a lighthouse beam aimed at Earth deliberately? Or a candle in the dark, unconcerned with who might notice? The former implies knowledge of us, of our stage of progress, of our capacity to look. The latter implies patience, trust, or perhaps indifference. The message is not for us specifically, but for anyone who learns to read the sky. And here another possibility arises. What if we are only eavesdroppers? Imagine two distant civilizations sending messages to one another across the long dark of space. Their couriers might be objects like these, messengers on orbits too subtle for us to track, encoded in geometries we barely understand. We, standing by the roadside, might only hear the faint echo of their passing, never intended for us, never designed for our understanding. We might be listening to a language not spoken to us, or even about us, but simply overheard by accident. This is a humbling idea. It shifts us from the role of chosen recipients to bystanders, listeners at the edge of a conversation not meant for our ears. Yet even that has its wonder. To overhear such a dialogue would still confirm that we are not alone, that others have written across the cosmos, that intention has crossed the void. Even if we were not the you of the message, the simple recognition that a message existed at all would transform our sense of place. And yet, another reflection softens this picture. For even if a comet's path were not steered toward Earth specifically, perhaps it does not matter. A message need not always be addressed. It can simply exist. A poem, once written, remains even if the author never intended it for us. A carving on stone remains long after the culture that shaped it has gone. The meaning, if we grant it meaning, is ours to take. Perhaps cosmic communication works like this too. A gesture made for someone else, or perhaps for no one in particular, can still awaken recognition in those who stumble across it. You, drifting now, may sense the double edge of this thought. On one side, the intimacy of being chosen, of being addressed directly. On the other, the vast humility of realizing the universe might not single us out at all. Both sides carry weight. Both sides change the way we look at the night sky. In the philosophy of messages, Intention is never the whole story. Reception shapes meaning too. Even if we are only eavesdroppers, what we hear could still matter profoundly. To find a whisper, even unintended, in the silence of space, is still to know that silence is not absolute. The absence would no longer be complete, and perhaps that is message enough. Consider again the bottle cast into the ocean. A sailor writes words not knowing who will read them, not knowing if anyone will. The sea may swallow it, the glass may break, the note may fade. Yet sometimes, improbably, the bottle arrives. It rests at the feet of someone centuries later, someone the author could not imagine. At that moment, the original intention matters less than the new connection. The act of noticing gives the message new life, a second meaning, a second sender. Perhaps interstellar objects, drifting silently through our system, are bottles like this, written not for us, but given meaning by our act of discovery. Some argue that if such messages exist, they could not be random. They must be carefully placed, aimed, prepared for the very eyes that would see them. But this may be a human bias, a need for significance. The cosmos does not owe us intention. Perhaps it is more generous than that. It offers meaning freely, scattered like seeds, for anyone with the patience to look. And whether we are chosen or not, we are still participants, still receivers of a gift we did not expect. If so, the question becomes gentler, more open-ended. Who is the message for? It might be for no one in particular. It might be for everyone. It might be for whoever learns to look, whenever they are ready, no matter where or when. That, too, is a kind of generosity. Soon, we'll face another question still more unsettling. If the message is not for us alone, then what role do we play in the wider conversation? Are we silent witnesses, or are we meant someday to answer? For now, we remain poised between possibilities. Perhaps the comet's path is only ice, dust, and gravity. Perhaps it carries no hidden hand, no secret script, no deliberate address. But in our wondering, in our watching, we create meaning. And perhaps that is the deeper truth. The act of listening may be as important as the act of speaking. And so, as Atlas fades and as silence folds around its trail, the question remains suspended. If there is a message, then who, truly, was it meant for? Carrying this thought onward, we find ourselves drawn into the question of time itself. If a message moves through space, not in seconds or years, but in centuries and millennia, then perhaps our entire framework for understanding intention is too narrow. We think in decades, we plan in lifetimes, we record in eras. But what if another mind, somewhere far beyond our horizon, breathes in spans of time so vast that our centuries appear only as days to them? The idea is not foreign to us. On Earth, traces of such patience exist. Cathedrals rising stone by stone across generations, their architects gone long before the final bell tower lifted into light. Temples carved into mountainsides, finished by descendants who could never meet the hands that began them. Libraries of stone and scripture designed to last not for one reign, but for ages. Even within our brief human span, we have sometimes dared to build as if time were not a barrier, but a medium. A civilization older, broader in vision, might carry this patience far beyond our reach. For them, sending a message that takes thousands of years to arrive, or even millions, might not be a burden. It could be as natural as our own decision to leave carvings in rock, or to place a note inside a bottle, trusting it may be read someday, somewhere, by someone. To them, the arc of a comet, the drift of an object like Atlas, might simply be a letter written in a language measured not in minutes, but in epochs. Millennia to them might feel like moments. Entire geological ages, which to us seem unfathomable, might be to them the span of a single cycle of thought. Imagine beings whose sense of waiting is not anxious, not stretched thin, but expansive, like a vast sky that accepts both dawn and dusk without hurry. If such a civilization were to leave a message, would we even recognize it as intentional when it arrives so casually, so slowly, without urgency? Perhaps they wait not for us, but for readiness. Readiness may not mean technology alone. It could mean a certain balance of curiosity and humility, a willingness to look up without rushing to conclusions. Maybe the timing of these interstellar visitors is not about astronomical coincidence, but about psychological preparedness. A whisper arriving only when its hearers can truly sit in silence long enough to listen. There is an echo of this in our own history. The builders of cathedrals did not know the faces of those who would one day kneel within them. The architects of pyramids could not imagine the cameras and satellites that would later map their angles with unblinking precision. They built anyway. They built not for themselves, but for continuity. What if civilizations older than ours build in the same way? Not in stone, but in stars. Not in mortar, but in the slow precision of orbital paths. If patience is their medium, then perhaps we should not expect a response in our lifetime. Perhaps the comet that sweeps past now is not the beginning of a conversation, but only one word of it. The next may come 1,000 years later. The full sentence may stretch across ages, each object a syllable, each alignment a pause. To us, that feels unbearable. To them, it may feel natural. You listening now may sense the weight of this thought. The possibility that our role is not to receive the whole message, but only to witness a fragment of it. And perhaps even that fragment is enough. A civilization patient enough to scatter words across millennia would not expect every reader to hold the entire text. They might trust instead that meaning emerges gradually, carried forward by generations, by records, by memory. There is a strange comfort here. The idea that humanity, so often restless, is invited to become a species of keepers, of listeners across time. We would not be asked to solve the puzzle all at once, but simply to pass it onward, to preserve the question itself so that those who come after us can continue the listening. Patience would then be shared, stretched across the lineage of our species, as if we too were learning to think not in years, but in epochs. Maybe it is only ice. Maybe it is only dust. Maybe it is only silence, drifting. Yet even in silence, the possibility of patience remains. To imagine another intelligence waiting for us, not with urgency, not with demand, but with the quiet trust that someday we will see. That is both unsettling and deeply gentle. It suggests not domination, not intrusion, but faith. Faith that, in time, any civilization capable of noticing will notice. In art, there are works that unfold only slowly, that require long looking, years of study before their full depth emerges. The cosmos may be offering us something similar. Not a sudden revelation, not a loud proclamation, but a mural painted on the canvas of time itself, each fragment arriving when it must, no faster, no slower. And if this is true, then perhaps the visitors we have seen so far, 3 in quick succession, are not the whole of the story, but simply the beginning. Perhaps they are a testing of waters, a first syllable, a gentle knocking at the door of our perception. Perhaps the real message stretches forward, waiting for future centuries to read it more clearly than we can tonight. Soon, the thought will turn to the implications of such waiting. If they trust time so deeply, what does that say about their Iderpidu, nature, and what does it demand of ours? For now, we sit with the image of patience as a bridge, patience as a form of speech, patience as a kind of faith in the unfolding of awareness itself. And so we end here with a quiet suspension. If civilizations measure moments in millennia, then perhaps Atlas and the others like it are not messages for today alone, but for tomorrow, for centuries from now, for whoever will finally learn. To hear the whole story written in the slow handwriting of the stars. From here, the silence opens into another layer, where the act of watching itself becomes the message. For all the speculation about intent, design, or hidden codes, there remains a quieter truth, that we are here, observing, and that this simple act of attention transforms both the watcher and the watched. To look into the sky is not neutral. It is not passive. The very fact of our gaze alters meaning. A comet sweeping unnoticed through the void is one thing. A comet witnessed, wondered over, studied with trembling awe, becomes another. The cosmos may never speak in the ways we expect, but perhaps it does not need to. Perhaps it teaches simply by arriving, by showing itself, and by leaving us to wrestle with the resonance of its passage. In this sense, observation itself is dialogue. To turn our eyes outward is to step into a conversation, even if the response is silence. We watch, we question, we imagine. And in that imaginative leap, we are participating. A teacher does not always answer the questions asked. Sometimes, the lesson lies in the pause, in the waiting, in the invitation to keep searching. The cosmos, vast and unknowable, may be teaching us through its mere presence. Human awe, too, is part of this exchange. Think of the first people who traced patterns in the night sky, joining stars into constellations that told stories of gods and heroes. They were not receiving words from the stars, yet something within them answered. Their awe became part of the dialogue, a living record of humanity's earliest steps into wonder. Today, our tools are sharper, our instruments vast, but the core experience remains unchanged. To see, to marvel, to try to understand, that is participation in the grandest possible conversation. Consider the comet as a metaphorical visitor, a silent envoy passing through. It does not pause to speak. It does not carve its message into stone. It only passes, glowing faintly, fragile and brief against the eternity of space. And yet, by watching, by noticing, we grant it meaning. We transform its trajectory into story, its silence into inquiry. The cosmos does not shout. It whispers, and it waits for us to lean closer. You, drifting in thought now, are part of this act. The quiet attention you give to these ideas, the images forming in your imagination as you picture vast objects moving in silence. This is participation. It may not change the stars, but it changes you. It shapes how humanity moves forward, what questions we ask, what instruments we build, what wonder we preserve. Each watcher adds a voice to the chorus of meaning. There is an old idea that to measure something is to change it. The quantum world hints at this, suggesting that observation itself shapes outcomes. While the cosmos at large may not bend to our gaze, it is undeniable that our noticing alters the significance we attach to it. An unnoticed world is barren. A watched world is full of story. A lone comet might be only ice, but to us, as we attend to its arc, it becomes possibility, becomes symbol, becomes something greater than itself. Perhaps this is the quiet lesson the universe offers. That meaning, is not handed down in certainty, but grown in the space between event and observer. The act of watching is creative. It draws significance out of silence. It turns coincidence into synchronicity, and mere motion into mystery. The cosmos may not speak in language, but it shapes us by giving us something to notice, something to wonder about, something to carry forward. In this way, even skepticism becomes part of the dialogue. To doubt, to question, to insist on natural explanations, these are also responses. They show engagement, attention, participation. The skeptic and the dreamer are both looking at the same sky, and in their different interpretations, the dialogue deepens. The cosmos does not require consensus. It requires only that we look. There is also a gentleness in this view. If meaning lies not in certainty, but in the watching itself, then no moment is wasted. Even if the comets are only rocks and dust, even if they carry no hidden message, they still succeed in stirring awe, in drawing our gaze upward, in expanding the horizon of our thought. The cosmos teaches by simply arriving. Its lessons are not always encoded, but embodied. To notice is to learn, even if what we learn is only how small, how fragile, how brief we are, and yet how capable of wonder. Think of a classroom where the teacher says nothing, only writes a single word on the board. The silence that follows is not emptiness, but invitation. Each student interprets, questions, stretches their thought. The lesson is not in the word itself, but in the engagement it provokes. The comets, the visitors from the deep, may be like this. Not full sentences, not lectures, but gestures. Gestures that awaken in us the dialogue we were always meant to begin. And so, the simple act of looking becomes profound. Our telescopes, our models, our calculations, they are extensions of human curiosity, tools built not only to measure, but to listen. To map the path of a comet is to take part in the dialogue. To debate its origin is to carry the conversation forward. To feel awe at its passing glow is to answer in the most human way possible. Maybe that is enough. Maybe the cosmos never intended to send us messages in the way we imagine. Maybe its message is the very fact of its unfolding, the vastness of its silence, the beauty of its patterns, the strangeness of its timing. And our response, fragile yet powerful, is to notice, to care, to wonder. Soon, the thought will shift, again, toward what it means for humanity itself to be reflected in these possibilities. The mirror the cosmos holds up to us as we watch it. But for now, we rest with this idea that in every act of observation, in every spark of awe, in every quiet moment where you or I look upward and feel something stir, the dialogue is already happening. The cosmos speaks not in words, but in presence. And our watching is already an answer. Carrying this thought onward, the dialogue between watcher and cosmos turns gently inward. For so long we have searched outward, wondering what might be sent toward us, what might be hidden in the faint trails of comets, in the silence between signals, in the improbable alignments of stars. Yet eventually the gaze returns home. The mystery does not end at the edge of our instruments. It folds back, asking what this search reveals about ourselves. This is not a reckoning in the hard sense of judgment, but in the softer sense of balance, an acknowledgement of scale, of place, of wonder. To stand beneath a sky we cannot control, to sense how small we are within it, is not defeat. It is clarity. It is recognition that our role may never be to master the vastness, but simply to notice it, to live within it, to respond with awe. You are small, but not unseen. The earth itself notices you, the ground carrying your weight, the air moving with your breath. The sun still rises, whether you are watching or not. The moon still pulls the tides, whether you are near the ocean or far inland. The stars blaze their long burning fires, and the comets make their fragile arcs. And all of it happens with or without our understanding. To know this is to feel both humbled and strangely secure. The mystery does not require us to solve it. The cosmos is not waiting for a correct answer, or for the right translation of a message hidden in dust and light. It continues regardless. It continues with or without our interpretation. That continuation, steady and unbroken, is itself a reassurance. Even if we never decode the purpose of 3-Eye Atlas, even if we never learn why interstellar visitors arrived in this particular sequence, the sky still turns. The seasons still change. Life still persists, fragile but enduring, within its narrow blue band of atmosphere. Perhaps the most profound lesson is that uncertainty is not failure. To remain in questions is not to be lost, but to be human. Our kind has always lived in uncertainty, about the weather, about harvests, about the stars above. Every generation has looked upward and wondered. Every age has carried unanswered questions, yet still sung songs, still told stories, still watched the sun rise with renewed hope. The not knowing is not the end. It is part of the story. The comets remind us of this. They sweep through, transient, mysterious, beautiful, and gone. They do not pause for explanation. They do not leave behind instruction. They pass, and their passing is enough to make us wonder. That wonder is the message. It binds us across generations, across cultures, across time itself. Our ancestors saw comets and felt awe. We do too, and those who come after us will continue the same act, repeating the same small astonishment that turns into something vast. The reckoning, then, is not with cosmic intelligence or hidden codes, but with our own place as watchers. We are not the center of this story, but we are not excluded either. We are participants, not by control, but by presence. By noticing, by wondering, by carrying the questions, we belong here. The cosmos is not diminished by our smallness. It is illuminated by our awareness, and so humility becomes a form of comfort. We do not need to bend the stars to our will. We do not need to demand answers from silence. It is enough to stand within the immensity, to know our measure against it, and to feel both fragile and cherished at once. To be small does not mean to be invisible. To be brief does not mean to be meaningless. A single act of watching, a single breath of awe, is part of the whole. If your thoughts drift now, let them rest on this. The sun will rise tomorrow, as it always has. The earth will continue to turn, carrying oceans, forests, and cities alike across the vast sweep of space. The comets will come and go, noticed or unnoticed, and still the mystery will remain. Nothing demands resolution. Nothing insists on certainty. You are permitted to simply exist within the unfolding, to be a witness, a question carrier, a participant in wonder. It may be that the hidden message we seek is not encoded in ratios, orbits, or silences, but in the invitation to notice at all. The cosmos may not speak in language, but its presence is enough to draw us outward, to open us, to humble us, and to comfort us. Perhaps the message is simply this: look, notice, and be. What if that is all we are asked to do? To look, so that the sky is not unseen. To notice, so that the fleeting is not forgotten. To be, so that awareness itself has a place in the vastness. That is no small task. That is no trivial role. For in a universe where most things burn without witness, drift without record, pass without memory, The act of being conscious, of seeing, of remembering, is profound. And so this soft reckoning leaves us here, small, uncertain, yet woven into the fabric of the whole. The mystery continues, whether or not we ever untangle it. The comets will keep passing, the stars will keep burning, the silence will keep teaching, and we, for however long we are granted, will keep watching. Perhaps that is enough.